As of yesterday, Pokemon Go has implemented a Shadow bonus in the game. This Shadow bonus allows Shadow Pokemon to deal 20% more damage, but they also take 20% more damage. Now, if you guys are familiar, when it comes to the raid scene, damage is kind of the bottom line. The faster you can kill the raid boss, the faster the raid boss is defeated. And as some of the longtime raiders out there may be aware, a 20% bonus is the same as a weather boost. And having the weather boost in a raid is insane as far as damage output goes. It turns a trio into a duo and so on. So the Shadow bonus is pretty crazy. Here you can see I have the DPS TDO spreadsheet up, and many Shadow Pokemon are overtaking legendary Pokemon. Even the mighty Mewtwo, a god tier Pokemon, is getting overtaken by the Shadow Salamence with Draco Meteor, which is pretty crazy. For those of you that aren't familiar with the spreadsheet, yes, the Deoxys attack form is on top, but its TDO, which is effectively its tankiness, total damage output, is basically McNuthin. It's 140. Like, this thing dies immediately when it comes into raids. However, Shadow Salamence here has basically the same DPS, which is damage per second, which is how rapidly you can defeat a raid boss, while having like 3 times the amount of tankiness. So yeah, Deoxys attack form, kind of a fool. Shadow Salamence ain't no joke. Now you might be thinking, Ryan Swag, how do you get these Shadow Pokemon onto the DPS TDO spreadsheet? When I load it up, I don't see them. Well, the trick is you have to go to the Customize feature. So then you pull up whatever Pokemon you want, let's say Oddish, right? And then you have its base attack and its base defense. Well, the Shadow bonus is a 20% modifier to them, so you have to pull open a calculator. So you take Oddish's attack stat, which is 131, and then you multiply that by 1.2, and then there you go. That is the Shadow bonus attack stat. So you can plug that in, and if you want to round it, you can round it. Doesn't matter. It's one number. And then for the base defense, that's 112. Then you multiply that by 0.83. And that's basically the 20% detriment, and that's how you get the modified defense stat. Then after you put those stats in, make sure you put Shadow after its name, and then you hit save. And then it will be added to your personal DPS TDO spreadsheet until you reset the spreadsheet, bringing it back to the default settings. And that's how I'm able to get all these Shadow Pokemon. Now, this isn't a true reflection of the Shadow bonus. The Shadow bonus does not directly influence their stats. It's a modifier on their stats. So you will see that Shadow Dragonite here has a 4,139 CP. That's not actually its CP. You won't visually see that CP in the game. But because of how the DPS TDO spreadsheet works, it's going to treat it as their actual stats. So don't get too hung up on the CP here. At any rate, last night I spent a lot of time adding in a whole bunch of different Shadow Pokemon stats to this spreadsheet by hand, just so I can deliver you guys the top 5 of each type with the Shadow bonus now in Pokemon Go. Now before we get into this, I want to give you guys a word of caution here. I do not recommend spending your Stardust on your Shadow Pokemon this instant, because I have a feeling in my heart of hearts that Niantic is going to nerf this in some way. So for right now, pays to know what the good is, but maybe give it a week and see what Niantic does, because everybody is basically screaming online about how ridiculous this Shadow bonus is. Also, if you're curious about PvP, the Shadow bonus also influences PvP. It's not as dramatic of an effect as it is here in raids, but there is a PvP effect. PvPoke has updated his simulator to include the Shadow bonus, so if you want to check it out right now, you can go to pvpoke.com and see how those Shadow Pokemon are doing. I will have a Shadow Pokemon PvP analysis in the near future, so if you want to see that, make sure to subscribe. But without further ado, let's get into our new Shadow God Pokemon. So starting out, we have Bug-type Pokemon. Volcarona and Genesect aren't added to the game yet. We actually have a Genesect event coming up in the near future. If you saw my video on all the March events, Genesect's one of the events. And yeah, these two were supposed to be number 1 and number 2 of Bug-type Pokemon. But then the Shadow bonus came. And yeah, so Shadow Pinsir, Shadow Caesar, and even Shadow Scyther are outdoing them by quite a bit. Next up, we have Dark-type Pokemon. And yeah, here are our new Dark Overlords. It's not Darkrai who literally has Dark in its name. It is Shadow Weavile, Shadow Houndoom, and Shadow Tyranitar. We also see Shadow Shiftry bringing some swag in here, doing basically as well as the unreleased Zoroark. So even Shadow Shiftry has to shout, being on the same level of Darkrai. Also for funsies, I added Mega Tyranitar stats. This is with the 9% nerf to Omega stat Pokemon. And yeah, Mega Tyranitar cannot compete with the top Echelons of the dark type Pokemon. Next up we have dragons, and yeah, it's no secret, Shadow Salamence and Shadow Dragonite are beating out Black Kyurem. Black Kyurem's not implemented in the game right now, but it is supposed to be the god tier dragon type Pokemon, like Mewtwo level of power dragon type Pokemon. And yeah, getting beaten out by the Shadow Pokemon. And that includes Rayquaza as well. Rayquaza is beneath Kyurem Black. Now, one thing that is a little bit of a saving grace for Kyurem Black is the fact that it has more TDO. It's a more tanky Pokemon with effectively the same DPS as their Shadow Dragon Overlords. However, Rayquaza, what we currently have in the game, is basically on the same level of TDO as them and far less DPS. So Shadow Salamence, Shadow Dragonite, it looks like they're the name of the Dragon game now. Then next up we have Electric type Pokemon, which are seeing the greatest influence from this Shadow bonus. Yeah, so we have the unreleased Zekrom. Zekrom's probably going to come out in May, sometime over the summer possibly, and was going to be the best Electric type Pokemon. Well, now Charge Beam Shadow Zapdos beats it out. Shadow Magnezone beats it out. Shadow Raikou, that was last month's Shadow Pokemon, beats it out. And then Shadow Electivire. On the top, finger in the air, ultimate electric type Pokemon in the game. I don't know if the Shadow Electabuzz family is currently in the Rocket pool, but if you can, get this Pokemon just to have it. Don't power it up right away. I don't know if Niantic's going to nerf it or not, but here he is, Shadow Electivire, ultimate electric type Pokemon. Then we got Fairy. Fairy's kind of my favorite of the bunch because the only one in there is Shadow Gardevoir with the Charm and Dazzling Gleam. And yeah, look at that gap between it and normal Gardevoir. You're going from 14.9 to 17.8 DPS. In fact, this DPS hike is so great that its TDO is actually higher. This is with the Shadow nerf to the defense, and it's actually higher than the base form of Gardevoir. Now, if you are curious about how much fairy types in Pokemon Go are hurting, here's Beartic. I don't even think Beartic is a fairy type Pokemon to begin with, but it does have a double fairy moveset, and it puts it ahead of Clefable, which is just silly. But yeah, fairy type Pokemon, they got it pretty rough, but now I guess they have Shadow Gardevoir to save the day. Got some evil fairy action going on there. Then there's a little bit of a saving grace when it comes to fighting type Pokemon. Shadow Pokemon have not yet infiltrated the fighting type club. Lucario, Conkeldurr, Breloom, Machamp, Blaziken, they do not have shadows yet. So Shadow Gallade is kind of chilling there in the back, basically as good as a fighting type Blaziken, but nobody uses fighting type Blaziken. We all use Machamp, Breloom, I guess Conkeldurr now, and Lucario. Now, if you're curious about Howlucha here, Howlucha is not implemented in the game right now. I just added it to my own personal spreadsheet to see how good it would be with Flying Press. So in the future, we will get Howlucha with Flying Press. If it has Karate Chop, you can expect it to do this well. But yeah, as soon as we get a Shadow Machamp though, or a Shadow Breloom, the script is going to get flipped on the fighting type Pokemon, that's for sure. Then next up, we have fire type Pokemon, and at the top, no surprise, Shadow Moltres, followed by Shadow Entei. Right after them is Reshiram, which is the Omega Legendary Fire type Pokemon that we can expect over the spring or summer in Pokemon Go. This guy was supposed to be the best Fire type Pokemon in the game, and it can barely even compare with Shadow Entei in performance, which is pretty nuts. Then we got Darmanitan, recent Pokemon added to the game, and just behind it, basically the same level of performance, is Shadow Magmortar. So if you think about it, as far as Pokemon that are currently implemented in the game right now, Shadow Magmortar is as good as Darmanitan. I also got Shadow Charizard and Shadow Houndoom here. They're not cracking the top 5 here because there's already so many other Shadow Pokemon beating them out. But Blaziken with the Blast Burn is kind of holding guard there. It's like, yeah, Shadow Charizard with the Overheat, you're as good as me in performance, but I'm slightly better. I guess another way of spinning this though is if you do have a Shadow Charizard and you are a Charizard enthusiast, I guess it would be as good as a Blaziken is as a fire type. So keep that in the back of your mind, I guess. But yeah, Shadow Moltres, Shadow Entei. You can get Shadow Entei this month in the game. It's Giovanni's new pet. So yeah, get live. Next up, we got Flying type Pokemon. And like Fighting types, Flying types have been relatively uninfluenced by the Shadow Pokemon so far. Shadow Moltres may rule the roost when it comes to Fire type Pokemon, but you cannot get Sky Attack on a Shadow Moltres. And because of that, Shadow Moltres does not influence the pure Flying type Pokemon. Then once again, we have Howlucha. Flying Press is a dual fighting flying type attack. Hawlucha's not in the game right now, and I don't think Niantic has the flying typing added to Flying Press yet. Also, it's just in the Game Master, but for funsies, I have Hawlucha on here. Expect him. But yeah, the only flying type Pokemon to really infiltrate these ranks is Shadow Scyther with the Air Slash and the Aerial Ace. Then we have Ghost type Pokemon, and no surprise here, Shadow Banette is on top. Banette was already a pretty good Ghost type Pokemon, so getting the Shadow bonus is obviously taking its DPS to the next level. Now for a little bit of a reality check here on Shadow Banette, while it does have higher DPS than Gengar, it's also more glassy than Gengar. So much so that it could be entering in that too glassy to actually be effective kind of range. So if Pokemon Go doesn't nerf the Shadow bonus outright, I'd say hold out on powering up a Shadow Banette until we get a relevant raid for it, and then make the decision on if this Shadow Banette is actually going to be better than a Gengar. But if you love Banette and you love that spooky shadow look to it, then hey man, new top DPS Ghost type Pokemon. Now that we're at the halfway point of Pokemon types, I just want to send out another reminder to you guys. While the Shadow bonus is so great right now, this 20% bonus to their damage is so huge right now, just be cautious. I feel like Pokemon Go is going to nerf this because it's pretty insane. And with that reality check out of the way, let's move on to Grass type Pokemon. I never thought this day would come, but Victreebel is now the best grass type Pokemon in the game with a Shadow bonus. Right behind it is Shaymin Sky form. We don't even have Shaymin's base form in the game yet. This is a mythical Pokemon, so I don't even know when we're going to begin to see the Shaymin Sky form. But when it comes out, it can rest assured that it's going to be second best to Shadow Victreebel of all things. Then after them, we have Shadow Shiftry. Shiftry's got the Leaf Blade, the Razor Leaf, just like Victreebel, just not as big of offensive stats as the Victreebel. And then we have our current best Pokemon, Roserade, hanging out with roughly as much TDO as them, but definitely less DPS. So that's pretty big. Then we got Shadow Venusaur. Shadow Venusaur with the Solar Beam because you can't get Grass Knot on a Shadow Venusaur as of right now. And then Porygon Z with the Shadow of all thing is backing up the rear here. I think this is what, number 6? So Hidden Power Grass and Solar Beam. If you got that on a Porygon Z, that's a Shadow. I guess it's a very good grass type attacker, but when it comes to these guys, I think I'd just stick to Roserade. Then next up we have ground type Pokemon, which are also marked relatively safe from the Shadow Boost Pokemon. At top we got Landorus Therian form, currently not implemented in the game. Then we got Excadrill, something everybody should be familiar with by now. And then we got Landorus Incarnate form. So in this month we have Thundurus, the previous month we had Tornadus, so you can bet your bottom dollar that in April we're probably going to be seeing Landorus Incarnate form. Then we got Groudon, Garchomp, and our best boy, Rhyperior. And then Shadow Swampert shows up. Now if you are curious about Shadow Flygon, I didn't put in the stats for Shadow Flygon because if Shadow Swampert's not getting the job done, then Shadow Flygon's not going to pick up either. If you're personally curious about Shadow Flygon, I showed you at the beginning of the video how to add Pokemon to the spreadsheet. Next up we have Ice-type Pokemon, and no surprise here, Shadow Weavile is at the top by quite a bit. Mamoswine used to be the Ice-type god, and now Shadow Weavile is here, just beating it out in just about every way imaginable. This slight difference in TDO doesn't come up too much in battle, and yeah, that DPS. However, after Shadow Weavile, Mamoswine, Normal Weavile, and Glaceon are pretty good. And then Hidden Power Ice Blizzard Porygon Z Shadow form shows up, being a boss. Basically a slightly better version of Jinx. And if you want a slightly worse version of Jinx, you got Articuno Shadow form. Yeah, Shadow bonus isn't fixing that bad attack stat, Articuno. I hate to say it. Then next up we have Normal type Pokemon. No surprises here. Porygon Z with the Shadow bonus is the top Normal type Pokemon. We don't use Normal type Pokemon for raids ever, but I guess for completedness, we gotta have them. If you're curious about Meloettas, the Meloettas here, these are mythic Pokemon. They're not implemented in the game right now, and I feel like they're kind of like 2022 type Pokemon. We might not see them for a very long time, but if you're curious how they may stack up against the other normal types in the meta, well, they are behind Shadow Porygon Z, that's for sure. And then right after normal Porygon Z, we have Shadow Porygon 2. So I guess Porygon Z is the bottom line right now when it comes to normal type Pokemon. Then next up we have Poison type Pokemon. No surprises here. Victreebel and Vileplume on top with their Acid Sludge Bomb movesets. Then right after them, we got Roserade, who's basically tied with Shadow Muck. So I don't know when we really use Poison-type Pokemon for anything in this game, but hey, Victreebel, best Grass, and now it is best Poison. Sorry, Roserade. Then next up, we have Psychic-type Pokemon. And I guess for now, you can rest assured that Mewtwo, with the Psystrike, is the best Psychic-type Pokemon in the game. These Shadow Boys are not infringing upon its dominance. One thing I will highlight to you, though, is Alakazam, the Shadow form, if it were to get the move Psychic, or a move more powerful than Psychic, then it would be more powerful than Psystrike Mewtwo. We do have that Alakazam Community Day coming up, so if it ends up being a new charge move for Alakazam, and the Shadow form is somehow able to get it, right now Shadow Pokemon can't learn Community Day charge moves, but we are having that Shadow TM event coming up, so if we get rid of the frustration, perhaps we can evolve into the Community Day charge move. That is yet to be seen, but Shadow Alakazam, kind of a little threatening to the Mewtwo here. Then next up we have Rock-type Pokemon, and no real surprises here, Rampardos is still the #1 Rock-type DPS attacker. Now I know a lot of you guys like Rhyperior, you're like, Rhyperior is like basically as good damage, but it's way more tanky, right? Well, we do have a DPS to the 3rd power times TDO sort, which is representative of a Pokemon's overall goodness. So if you're worried about glassy kind of stats influencing the game, well, this is how you get the big meaty guys. And as far as the all-powerful meaty guys goes, yeah, Shadow Tyranitar is beating out Rock Wrecker Rhyperior. So Rock Wrecker Rhyperior, you had your day in the sun, but Tyranitar here with the Shadow form is blocking out the sun. And for funsies, I also added Mega Tyranitar stats, just like I did with the Dark form. I added this guy a while back, so just kind of funny to see him popping up here, being worse than Shadow Tyranitar of all things. But hey, in the future, Shadow Mega Tyranitar, I guess, watch out. Man, Shadow Mega Tyranitar, what about that Shadow Rampardos? We don't have a Shadow Cranidos yet, but Shadow Rampardos sounds like it'd be pretty insane. And then for Steel-type Pokemon, Metagross with the Meteor Mash is holding the line strong. Yeah, Shadow Metagross can't get Meteor Mash, so it's stuck with Flash Cannon, and because of that, it is behind the OG Meteor Mashin' Metagross here. So Meteor Mash, Community Attack, if you don't have it, try to trade people for it. But yeah, it's a little nice to see that Metagross is beating out the Shadow form here. Like, take that, Shadow Boy. You ain't got no Meteor Mash. Metagross got the Meteor Mash. And then finally, we have Water-type Pokemon. And Bubble Crabhammer Kingler is the name of the game when it comes to Water-type DPS. Now, if you guys are familiar with previous raid graphs that I have made, Crabhammer Kingler really hasn't been making a good showing because of its TDO. It's fainting too quickly, so more often than not, Kyogre is the better option. Well, Gyarados is more tanky than the Kingler, and has basically the same DPS as the Kingler. So we may be seeing Shadow Gyarados pop up in raids where water-type damage is relevant. Now if you're curious about that Shadow Swampert can't learn Hydro Cannon, but it can learn Surf. And with the Shadow bonus, it's slightly better than the Hydro Cannon predecessor. However, if you really look at their stats, you will see that Hydro Cannon Swampert is better than the Shadow Swampert. I'd say right now, for all intents and purposes, Kyogre is still the #1 Water-type Pokemon. And there you have it, guys. The top 5 of each Pokemon species with the Shadow bonus now in Pokemon Go. Now, just to reiterate, I think Niantic is probably going to nerf the Shadow bonus because it's so crazy good right now. So don't go too crazy with your Stardust spending for the time being. Maybe give it a couple weeks, see if Niantic budges and nerfs the Shadow bonus here before dropping heavy Stardust. And once again, if you want to add these Pokemon to your own DPS TDO spreadsheet, go to Customize, go to Species, and then multiply the base attack by 1.2, and then multiply the base defense by 0.83. And that's how you will get the Shadow stats. And then make sure to put Shadow after the Pokemon's name so it doesn't confuse you on the spreadsheet, masking itself as the normal Pokemon. And then once again, it doesn't influence their CP. The CP just changes on the spreadsheet because I'm changing the stats of the Pokemon. The stats change the CP, but in the actual game, it's just a modifier given to the stats. It doesn't affect the CP. And yeah, so that's the Shadow bonus in the game right now. If you have any questions on this content, comment below, let me know what's up, and I'll be happy to help you out. And if you enjoyed this content and you want to see more like it, maybe you want to see how the Shadow bonus is influencing the PvP scene. Well, make sure to subscribe to SwagTips. SwagTips. Victreebel though. I mean Victreebel.